The Tulsa Race Massacre and the Destruction of Black Wall Street. This was the Greenwood neighborhood of Tulsa, Oklahoma, a thriving Black community which in 1921 was home to at least 11,000 people. And in a time of segregation, Jim Crow laws, and white supremacy, was so filled with successful family-owned businesses that it was often referred to as Black Wall Street. Here, 40% of residents were professionals or skilled craftspeople, and many made more than minimum wage today. Black businesses thrived, including grocery stores, pharmacies, ice cream shops, and even hotels. The J.B. Stratford Hotel was a 65-room luxury hotel estimated to be worth about $2 million in today's money, and was a symbol of the success and wealth of the community. 6 families in Greenwood owned planes, one of them being Simon Berry, who operated the first and possibly only Black-owned airline company in the country. Business in Greenwood as a whole was so successful that bills of money would circulate 35 to 100 times, or up to 19 months before being spent outside of the community. However, all this success wasn't isolated. Already foundational racial tension grew as a result of Black success. Many white people were angry that Black people didn't accept their position as second-rate citizens and instead created a successful and thriving community separate from segregation. This growing resentment, combined with white supremacy organizations like the KKK, meant that many white people were looking for a reason to destroy Black success. Their supposed justification came on May 30th, 1921, when 2 teenagers, 19-year-old Black shoe shiner Dick Rowland and a 17-year-old white elevator operator named Sarah Page, entered the Drexel Building elevator in downtown Tulsa. Nobody really knows what happened in the elevator, but when they came out, Sarah screamed while Dick ran away. The next day, Rowland was arrested, and it kind of resulted in an article being published accusing Rowland of assaulting Sarah. And this article also kind of acted as a call to action to white people to find Rowland and serve justice, I guess. So Rowland was being kept in the Tulsa County Courthouse. And so as news spread through this article, hundreds of white people showed up at the courthouse demanding that Rowland be lynched. And so when the people in the Greenwood neighborhood heard about this, about 75 Black men came down to the courthouse. Some of them were armed to protect Rowland from being lynched and from this white mob. And when they were assured that he would be protected, they were leaving when there was a scuffle between the white and Black groups, and a gun was fired. And after this, fighting broke out. And in the end, 12 people were killed, 2 of them Black and 10 of them white. I think that it's interesting that this was the inciting incident of the massacre because, as we've been talking about in class, a lot of white men were afraid of 2 things from freed Black people: that they would take their jobs and that they would take white women. And so I don't think that it's a coincidence that this specific accusation, whether it was justified or not, of a Black man supposedly assaulting a white woman was the reason for the massacre. So this graphic created by the New York Times kind of shows how the kerfuffle, I guess you could say, at the courthouse resulted in the massacre in the Greenwood district. So the white mob went through downtown Tulsa and eventually ended up at the Greenwood Business District before entering the neighborhood area where they killed and burned the entire neighborhood. When the white mob reached Greenwood, the Black residents tried to fight back, but they were eventually outnumbered, and so the white mob entered. And while the white mob was there, they looted homes and they pocketed small valuables and hauled out larger valuables. They murdered anyone who resisted, either taking their valuables, burning their houses, or just walking on the streets. And they set fire to all of the homes that they had already looted, including those that still had people inside. Additionally, the police, instead of protecting the Black neighborhood, which was under attack, was arming the white mob. And this really shows the racism of the police, because they believed that by arming the white mob, that they would be increasing the police force, when in reality, they were increasing the people committing the violence. Additionally, planes flew overhead, dropping nitroglycerin bombs, and these were private planes owned by white people in Tulsa. Some eyewitness accounts talk about what they saw during the massacre. One of them was Genevieve Elizabeth Tillman Jackson, and she said, quote, "I saw a truckload of dead bodies being carried somewhere. I was just spellbound looking at those bodies. Bodies that looked like they had just haphazardly been thrown into that truck, with arms and legs just dangling." And then another eyewitness account, Kenny I. Brooker, said, quote, "We could hear Dad pleading with the mobsters. He was begging them, please don't set my house on fire. But of course, that is exactly what they did just before they left with Dad. He rushed to the attic and rescued us. We slipped into the crowd of fleeing Black refugees. Thank God we did not burn in that attic." So after 2 days of violence, 300 Black people were killed, 800 to 1,000 Black people were injured, 35 blocks of Greenwood were destroyed, and 1,250 homes were looted and burned. And these are all just estimates because, as you'll see later, there was a cover-up of the events, so it's difficult to know exactly what happened. Additionally, 6,000 Black people were put into detention camps, and the reason for this is that Tulsa believed that they were capturing the Black mobsters who incited the riot, and these camps were violent, dirty, and often involved forced labor. In reality, though, they were interning the people who had the act committed against them and allowing the white people to go free. Although after a week, almost everyone was released from these camps, this was only the beginning of the media and government cover-up of the events. Immediately after the massacre, white newspapers attempted and often succeeded in both downplaying the impact of the event and effect of the riot, and also framing it as being the fault of, quote, a Black mob. The newspaper portrayed the massacre as a Black uprising instead of a massacre against Black people from a white mob. And Black people were blamed for the events in literally every single possible way. They said that the white response was only natural, harkening back to the inciting incident of the massacre and the idea that the idea of white men being afraid of Black men taking white women. And they wrote that the police response was only unsuccessful because there were Black people who were police officers and not because the police were arming the white mob. They also framed the uprising. They also framed it as an uprising against Black oppression, which was something that white people were really afraid of. When rebuilding began, Tulsa attempted to prevent it, saying that Black people were, quote, a race too immature to respect equality, end quote. Since the massacre was framed as a riot, every single insurance claim was denied under a riot clause. These amounts totaled to about $2.7 million. And in the end, only 40% of people rebuilt. Many of the others were either murdered, thrown in mass graves, or moved away from Tulsa completely. The repercussions of this event are insurmountable. One of them is the Black wealth that was lost as a result of the destruction of Black Wall Street. The American Journal of Economics and Sociology estimated that the destruction of Black Wall Street totaled in over $200 million in today's money. Not only is that a massive amount of money lost in 1921, but it doesn't even take into consideration the accumulation of wealth lost from 1921 to now. And that amount is impossible to estimate. And that's why learning about the Tulsa Race Massacre isn't only important to understand the true history of America, but also to understand the fight for reparations. In the 100 years since the massacre, there have been no reparations for the survivors or the descendants of survivors. Many of the survivors and their descendants struggle to pay for basic necessities. And although Tulsa has a $30 million grant to preserve the memory of the massacre, none of that money is going directly to the massacre survivors or the descendants, and it's instead going to a museum. However, after 20 years of fighting, in May 2022, the lawsuit seeking reparations moved forward in court. While this doesn't mean that reparations are guaranteed, it is a step forward in the fight for reparations. One of the descendants of a massacre survivor shared why this event in particular in the fight for reparations is so important. He said, quote, "If we win Tulsa, we can get justice in every city in the United States of America, including for reparations for the enslavement of African American people. Why wouldn't Tulsa be the example?" And I think that really sums up why this event is so important to learn about, because it shows how successful Black people were destroyed and killed because of racism, and how the government and the media tried to cover it up, and therefore no justice was given to those people or their descendants. And now Tulsa has the opportunity to give even a little bit of justice through reparations, and how that could set the precedent for other incidents which have happened in history around the country. And this is my bibliography and image sources.